Welcome. So let's have our PowerPoint come on. Great, thank you. Before we get our meeting started, we want to go over just a few housekeeping things. So let's go to our next slide. We're going to go over some instructions. Para las personas que están participando en persona aquí en el sitio, tenemos traducción en español. Los audífonos están al frente del salón. So if you're participating over Zoom, you will need to select on your screen at the bottom. There is a globe. You will need to select for a language, regardless of the language that you're participating in. So please make sure you do that. Para las personas que están participando sobre Zoom, si necesitan traducción en español, por favor seleccionen el globo que está al pie de la pantalla. So we will be participating over Zoom, so it's a hybrid meeting, and then in person. So you will be providing comments either verbally or over the chat, and the features are on your screen here. Vamos a estar participando usando las opciones sobre Zoom. Pueden proveer sus comentarios usando alzar la mano, o también pueden poner sus comentarios en el chat. Great, and so you're seeing on the screen on Zoom that you need to select a language. So whether you're participating in English language or Spanish language, you will need to select that so that we can all hear everyone who's providing a verbal comment. Por favor, seleccionen su idioma para que puedan participar y todos los puedan escuchar. If you're participating over by phone, there are 3 dots at the bottom of the screen, and that will be your prompt to select for other, and you can select your language. Si están participando sobre teléfono, pueden seleccionar más a la pantalla, al pie de la pantalla de su celular, y pueden seleccionar más para seleccionar su idioma. And we'll just get give folks a few minutes to do that. That will be important. We had a meeting last night, and we weren't able to hear some people because they hadn't selected that. Great. And then after this announcement, we'll switch over to the languages, and that will become pretty important at that point. Okay, let's go to the next slides. We want to get to the welcome, and these are just showing you the different options over Zoom. So if our team over Zoom can turn on the language, then we can get started. Great. So thank you all for attending this evening. I will be helping to support with the facilitation, but first I want to introduce our Director of Planning and Development, Lisa Plantman, who will introduce the team and welcome you.
Good evening. Thank you so much for coming here tonight, and for those of you participating by Zoom, we're very happy to have you. This is Esmeralda Garcia. She is one of the consultants that's helping us on the housing element, and she's going to be facilitating the meeting tonight. But what I did want to say was we're very happy to have you as part of our process on the housing element. Every 8 years, every jurisdiction in California is required to update their housing element. And that involves assessing the needs of our community for our seniors, our low income, our underserved, and then also planning for future housing. You'll learn a lot tonight about how we get the numbers from the state and how that processes through the Association of Governments and then comes to each jurisdiction. So really the purpose tonight is to explain our process, talk to you about the possible areas that would be rezoned to accommodate the housing numbers that have been allocated to the county. And we have our staff here to present all that information to you. So tonight we have Alan Bell, who is our supervising planner. We have Brianna Alamilla, I'm going to get that correct, Jesse Steele, who's one of our project managers. We have Selena Evilsizer, also a project manager, Dan Clemen, deputy director, and we have Lila Spring out. She was out at the front desk welcoming people. And then on Zoom, we have Julie Harris, Eva Marrero, and Danielle Moore. So you've got the whole team here, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to the team. Thank you so much again for coming.
Great. Once again, welcome. My name is Esmeralda Garcia, and we are joined by a team of facilitators who are on over Zoom and supporting the meeting there. So let's go back to our PowerPoint presentation, our slides, so that we can go over a few things. So to start, just want to go over our objectives for this evening. There's a lot of information that we are sharing with you today. This is just our first touch point with you all to share with you what the team has been working on. So that's one of our primary objectives, is to share with you a lot of information. Also, we want to make sure that we get your input. So tonight is a listening session. I think as I was out front at the sign-in table, people were asking, well, how many minutes do we have and what's the format? It's a listening session, so we're here to get all your feedback. We have an entire team here who will address questions, but also gather everything so that it will inform the next steps in the process. So, so that's the other thing that we're focusing on this evening. And then lastly, just to provide the community an opportunity to be engaged in this process. So let's go to our next slide here, where we're going to talk about what we're going over this evening. So for those of you in person here, there is an agenda that was provided to you out at the sign-in table, and then also a sheet of paper for you to write down your comments since you're not on over Zoom and can't chat. So for this evening, we're going to go over the technical analysis and what has taken place to date, what the team has been working on, an overview of what a housing element is for those of you who may not be as familiar. And then also there was a survey focused on housing needs that was conducted previously, and so we will share with you the results of that. And then we will go over the rezones. We will have a brief period for Q&A. We want to ask that you focus your questions on that topic so that we can get to the one that's kind of meaty, which is the rezones. It's a lot of information, so we want to make sure that we allow enough time for that and hear everybody's comments for that. And then we'll wrap up. We're here till 8 p.m., so there is no time limit for your comments. But on the next slide, I do want to show our group agreements, or how our protocol for this evening. Just want to be respectful of everyone, so allowing enough time for everyone to provide their comments both over Zoom and here in person. We're going to go between both rooms, both forums. And then also just to make sure that we allow enough time and space for everyone to provide their questions and comments. Staff is here to address any clarifying questions. And then also, please make sure if you have some ideas that are formulating, jot them down on your sheet of paper here in person. And if you're on over Zoom, you're welcome to type those into the chat. And then also, just we want to thank you for attending this evening and participating with us. So let's go to our next item here. Next, we're going to go over what is a housing element update and what is involved with that. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessie Steele.
Hi, everyone. As Esmeralda mentioned, I'm Jessie Steele, and I'm one of the project managers for the Housing Element Update. Before we begin, I just want to set the stage for the area that we're talking about that's going to be covered by the Housing Element Update. The county's jurisdiction is shown in orange on this map, and it includes all of the unincorporated areas of the county. So that's everything that's located outside of an incorporated city, Vandenberg Space Force Base, and the Los Padres National Forest. So the Housing Element Update will apply to all of these unincorporated areas. Next slide. So what is a housing element? I'm going to go into a bit more detail later, but in short, the housing element is a housing plan that must be updated every 8 years. And this is a state mandate for all cities and counties in California. The housing element must plan for everyone in the community, including seniors, families, and workers. It also needs to allow for all types of housing to be built, including houses, apartments, and farm labor housing, for example. It must specify exactly where new housing can be constructed or allowed as well. Next slide. The housing element is one of 13 elements of the county's comprehensive plan. And as I mentioned on the last slide, the housing element must identify and analyze the housing needs of the unincorporated county and accommodate those housing needs for all income levels. The California Department of Housing and Community Development, or State HCD, determines the number of units the county must accommodate in order to satisfy its fair share of regional housing needs. This is called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA for short, and I'll talk about that more later too. The housing element must include a set of goals, policies, and programs to provide housing for all segments of the community and remove barriers to housing development. Robust public engagement is also required throughout the housing element process, which is why we're hosting this workshop this evening. And lastly, the county must adopt an update to its housing element and submit it to state HCD for certification. Next slide, please. This slide here shows the three-step RHNA development and housing element update process, which occurs every 8-year planning cycle. First, state HCD determines the housing needs for all of California, and then state HCD provides the total RHNA for our region to our local council of governments, which in our case is the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, or SBCAG. SBCAG works with the county and cities to equitably distribute the RHNA to every jurisdiction. SBCAG adopted our current RHNA plan in July of 2021, and since then, the county and cities have been working to update their respective housing elements to accommodate their RHNAs. The county's housing element update, which addresses only the unincorporated areas, must identify potential housing opportunity sites and, as necessary, rezone sites, and consider new policies and programs to facilitate additional housing. Next slide. So SBCAG's final RHNA plan took a bit of a different approach this time than in previous RHNA plans, in that it set housing unit targets for the unincorporated North County and South Coast areas, as shown on the map. The reason for allocating the RHNA into these two subregions is twofold. First, it's intended to comply with SBCAG's Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy, which in short aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled countywide. And secondly, it's meant to address the existing jobs housing imbalance that exists between the North County and the South Coast. Next slide. So these tables here show the county's RHNA for the unincorporated North County and South Coast areas. The RHNA is distributed across 4 household income categories, which are very low and low income, moderate income, and above moderate income. The income distribution is set by the state's affordability calculations and is based on the median household income for a family of 4 in Santa Barbara County. It's important to note that the RHNA numbers shown here represent just the bare minimum that the county is required to accommodate in its housing element in order to comply with state law and SBCAG's RHNA plan. Next slide. To determine whether the county had sufficient existing capacity to meet these RHNAs, staff created an inventory of all land available for residential development within the unincorporated county. The results of the site inventory showed that the county is facing a shortfall of units across every income category in the South Coast. The South Coast RHNA shown on the first row of this table is based on current zoning, but it does include a 15% buffer for the very low, low, and moderate income categories. And the county needs this buffer because there's always a chance that projects will not develop at maximum densities or even the densities that we project in the housing element. And there are penalties from the state for not having enough sites to accommodate our RHNA. The current capacity shown in the second row of the table is based on existing zoning, but it does include projections for accessory dwelling unit development, or ADU development, and it also includes pending housing projects that have submitted a pre-application or an application to the county. And as you can see in the bottom row shown in red, the county has a shortage of 1,780 very low and low income units, 1,038 moderate income units, and 662 above moderate income units. But luckily these shortfalls can be made up through rezoning sites to higher residential densities, which the county will do as part of the housing element. Next slide. And this slide here just shows some of the state-mandated timeframes with which the county must comply. First, when the draft housing element is ready, the county must make the draft available for public comment for 30 days. Then, the county must submit the draft to state HCD for initial review, and state HCD has up to 90 days for that first round of review. After that, the county must adopt the housing element and submit the adopted version to state HCD again, and the county works with state HCD during the certification process to revise the housing element as needed. State HCD may take up to 60 days for the first round of certification review, and then the county will likely go to 2 or 3 rounds of review with HCD in this manner. The state's deadline for the county to adopt the housing element update is February 15th of 2023. However, due to the amount of work involved with developing the site's inventory and identifying potential rezones, the county is not going to meet this deadline. As a result, on February 15th, 2023, the county will be subject to a state law that requires the county to permit multifamily residential developments by right, meaning ministerially, if they include 20% or more affordable units. And that is lower income affordable units. And lastly, the county has until February 15th of 2024 to fully implement and adopt the rezones that are identified in the housing element. Next slide. Here we have a timeline showing our past, current, and upcoming work efforts on the housing element update. So starting with the sites inventory, staff began creating the inventory this past February, and we just finished the inventory this month. In March of this year, the county made targeted presentations and project updates to certain groups, including the Cities County Joint Affordable Housing Task Group, the Elected Leaders Forum on Homelessness, and the Adult and Aging Network, for example. Staff also contacted property owners regarding potential rezoning of their properties and will continue public outreach to the wider community until next summer when the housing element is adopted. The county began drafting the housing element itself in October and plans to continue writing the chapters and appendices through winter and early 2023. And the county also kicked off environmental review this past July, and we held a scoping meeting in August on the Programmatic Environmental Impact Report, or PEIR, and the county is going to continue working with our consultants to draft the EIR until winter of 2023. And finally, the county expects to adopt the housing element and the EIR in summer of 2023. So with that, next slide, please. I'd like to open up the floor to any questions that are specifically related to the housing element process or RHNA development process. I know many of you have questions regarding rezones specifically, but we're going to cover that a little bit later in our presentation today. Selena will answer most of your questions with that. All right, so with that, we'll open up the floor.
Great. We'll have folks step up to the mic here to the podium, and then we also have people over Zoom who want to make a comment. So would you like to make your comment or question? Please. To the podium. Thank you. And that's just so that everyone can hear, because there's people on over Zoom. Yes, absolutely.
My first question, living in the ag, the much cherished ag land in Carpinteria, is my understanding is one is there's two off of Villa Real. For at least the last 10 years, even though I'm a resident there, we don't go out to Villa Real between the hours of 3 and 5 because it's backed up from Santa Monica Road almost to Nadiver sometimes. Not Nadiver, I'm sorry. You know, a good half mile every day, okay? So my question is about the housing element, about putting this mass amount of housing right off of Villa Real on a one-lane road. Did you take into consideration that we are on a one-lane road with no ability to open up to the 101, because the 101 has just been expanded? So would we be backed up now, say, to Montecito? Because we're already backed up a half mile, and we all have to go out on Foothill. So in picking a spot, such as behind what we call Kim's Market, for those of us who live in the First District, and also down on the other side of the polo field, that Villa Real is a one-lane road in each direction, and there is no way to open that up. And you put all this traffic in there, what are you doing for to the first, the South Coast? Not to mention all the promises that have been made for decades about preserving agricultural land all I can see from the current plan is the only agriculture, if you want to call it that, that's being preserved are cannabis operations, and everybody else is fair game. If you can answer those questions, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. As a reminder, we are going to be talking about the rezone specifically a little bit later in the presentation, but to answer your questions, we are going to be analyzing traffic transportation impacts as part of the programmatic EIR. That is absolutely something we're going to be looking at and analyzing as an impact.
So it does matter.
Yes.
Okay, and in regard to why only cannabis operations are preserved and nobody else's agriculture has any consideration here, the question that a lot of people in the South First District feel, is this a backhanded way just to provide housing for our failing cannabis industry whose revenues are down 40% for the county?
As a general statement, the county was actually trying to avoid converting agricultural lands of all kinds to
really?
residential. We were specifically starting our search within the urban area and trying to avoid conversion of ag lands for a variety of reasons. However, we did not single out in any way specifically avoiding cannabis farms, but we were trying to avoid ag in general.
But not one cannabis property or operation or proposals affected. That's what I'm pointing out. Okay, thank you, though. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So there's quite a few people on Zoom too, and I see hands raised here, but I do want to remind folks that we have 2 sections left on the agenda. Is your question, if your question is about what a housing element is and the information that Jesse presented, please, we'll call on you. If it's related to rezones or that topic, we have information to share with you. We'd like to share that first before we take questions regarding that topic. So we'll go to one more person here, and then we'll go over Zoom. So we'll go to you, sir. And your question is related to what Jesse presented. Okay, great. And then over Zoom, we have Kim and Mike next. And so if your question is related to what Jesse presented, we'll take you next.
My name is Ethan Woodhill. Been a Goleta resident for all my life. Mother lives in the same house I came home from the hospital to in 1974. My question is, in the process, the city has to do their own, of Goleta has to do their own investigation, and then do they, if I'm correct, submit their findings and their desires to you as the county, or are they running independently? And further on in that question, just to fully clarify and be done, are we having multiple agencies? So we have a city agency of Santa Barbara within the county. I mean, we have multiple cities within the county. And then we have the county. And if we were looking at that big orange map of where the county is, and we're looking at Goleta like this, and you're putting all this around, okay, so are we having overlap is my question. And are we doing multiple jobs over and over again?
It's a good question. And to clarify, every county and every city separately, each jurisdiction separately, has to do their own housing element for the area contained within their jurisdiction. So the city of Santa Barbara is doing their own housing element for the area within their boundaries, so is the city of Goleta, and so is the unincorporated county for the remainder of the county that's not within an unincorporated city.
And just to add, because we're talking about a fine line. I mean, I live on the edge of Cathedral Oaks, so I constantly deal with county, city. I live in the city, right next door. I could throw a rock into the county. So now I have, who do I call? What do I call about? Which person's responsible? And now I worry about over-governing. Too much overlap. Too much, it's them, it's not me.
Yeah, just to be clear, so when the process starts, the state assigns a housing number to the entire county. So the entire county receives one number, and then it's the job of SBCAG to work with the 8 cities in the unincorporated county to divide that number up among themselves. So each city receives their own number, and they have to satisfy and accommodate the housing needs within their city. And then the county is responsible for the unincorporated areas. And we do that separately, just as each city works independently. So in that sense, there is not overlap in terms of the numbers themselves. They've already been separated out, and each jurisdiction has its own responsibility to come up with its own housing plan or housing element. So all the cities are currently on the same track as the county. Thank you.
Sir, do you have a question related to what Jesse presented? Okay.
Yes, hi, my name is Patrick O'Connor. I'm in Carpinteria in District 5 and a member of the Carpinteria Architectural Review Board. My question has to do with the comment about use by right. If you could expand a bit on the ministerial process and what that means in the unincorporated areas and just how that works. It's a slippery slope.
Sure. So use by right, it means that if a developer comes in to submit an application for residential development to the county, we would have to look at that application ministerially, meaning we can only apply objective standards, existing objective standards to that project. There would be no discretionary review, no design review, for example, unless the standards were objective. And objective things include, height limit is 25 feet, or the setback is 10 feet, something that does not require staff to make any subjective comments or review. And there's also no appeals.
And then just a few questions over Zoom related to what you presented is whether, how, and why it was determined that a PEIR is sufficient, and is that sufficient? And then also, what happens if the county does not meet the deadline?
So I'll answer the second question first because it's kind of related to what we were just talking about. The consequence of the county not meeting the statutory deadline that the state sets for submitting our housing element is that we are subject to the ministerial by right development starting on February 15th, 2023, our deadline date, or I guess February 16th, the day after. And then the other question was about whether or not a PEIR is sufficient. The requirement actually for the PEIR comes from state law, from the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. It requires that if we are going to be doing rezones, we have to do that level of environmental review.
Can we have a couple of speakers or people over Zoom? Did you want to respond, Lisa?
Yeah, just one thing I wanted to add is that the housing element process has gotten quite complicated over the years. Our last cycle was a simpler process, but the state has been changing the laws as we have been going along. And what you'll be finding is in most of California, the jurisdictions are having a difficult time making that deadline. For instance, in the SCAG region in Southern California, there are 197 agencies, 191 missed the deadline. So, and they're all working to catch up. So, yeah, there's 197, 191 missed the state deadline. Six made it. Six. Yeah, six made it. So I think it's happening in Northern California too. So, I think all the jurisdictions are doing the best that they can to get through the process within the deadline, but we're all sort of facing similar circumstances. And we've been doing what we can, talking to HCD about explaining to them that really there ought to be some kind of extension for jurisdictions that are making a diligent effort to go through the process and identify sites and actually plan for future housing needs in our community.
So we have a couple.
You haven't talked to HCD, but they're hard to convince, but.
So if you have a question related to what Jesse presented, we'll call on people over Zoom. There's quite a few. So because if your comment or you want to, ask a question related to the rezones, we do have a presentation for that might inform some of your comments or questions. So before we call on Kim and then Mike, just want to remind folks over Zoom to please select for a language. Regardless of which language, whether it's English or Spanish, you must select from one, because if you don't, then we will not be able to hear you here in the building. So let's go to Kim.
Hi, my name is Kim Seefeld. We could spend days just addressing the state of California's illegal destruction of local sovereignty and zoning laws. But tonight we find ourselves fighting our own county's attack on the city of Carpinteria's local autonomy and zoning protections. Why is that? Because the county refuses to take on the state's mandates? Because the county thinks Carpinteria won't fight back? Because the proposal for the South Coast around Carpinteria is highly offensive. It dumps the entire housing element requirement in a circle around Carpinteria. It violates the county's own ag and urban boundary rules. It does this without regard to our limiting topography, our lack of infrastructure, our lack of water, inadequate roads. So then the next step is we'll be annexed and the city of Carpinteria will be gone. My question is this workshop designed to listen to us and change your proposal? Or is it just to give lip service to our comments?
The answer to that is we are absolutely here to listen, and we are absolutely willing to make changes based on public comment. One thing that I want to remind everyone of is that staff is going to provide a recommendation to the decision makers, to the Board of Supervisors regarding everything within the housing element, including the rezones. And ultimately, it is going to be up to the Board of Supervisors to decide what stays in or goes in the housing element and what is submitted to state HCD. So that is to say that you are absolutely welcome to tell us what you want, but you also need to tell the board when it comes time to do that.
Next, we have Mike over Zoom.
Yes, just a question about the schedule. You showed the schedule that we have basically 6 months of required review and comment before the February 15th deadline that we're obviously not going to meet. Why was it that the release of the map was delayed from the end of August to early November, about 2.5 months? It obviously ate right into that time. If you can provide some transparency about what took longer than expected on an ongoing basis, that'd be very helpful.
Sure, and I actually appreciate this question because it gives me a chance to highlight all of the hard work that our team has done. It has been an extremely difficult, challenging process to identify enough sites and to do it in a manner that takes into account environmental constraints, existing densities, the desires of the property owners, and so many other factors. So when we initially set out to identify rezone sites, we were hoping to, we were hoping it was going to be easy, but the fact of the matter is there's not a lot of vacant land in the urban area in the county, and it was really hard to find sites. But we wanted to do our due diligence and make sure that the sites that we looked at were very thoroughly analyzed. So that's why it has taken so long for us to release the rezones. But we also wanted to make sure that we provided the public opportunity for comment. So even though we just finished our sites inventory last week, we're here this week to open up the floor for comments.
Next, we have V. Bentz over Zoom.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I'm a resident of Carpinteria. I've been here for 10 years. Before that, I lived in Cambria and then Santa Barbara. I am just appalled. It seems like we're all acting like lemmings, running ourselves off of a cliff of self-destruction as we insist that we must develop more and more housing at a time when we're in a massive drought, fire, climate crises, and there are people moving out of the state more so than moving into the state. This is coming from a law that I understand was put into place back in 1970. Establishing what's called the RHNA quotas. Since then, community after community has been overwhelmed complying with this law. What I'm asking for is let us stand up and say enough is enough. We don't have the water. We don't want to continue building more highways and large cities, which we're overrun with already. We have climate crisis. We need to be cutting back on development, not encouraging it, not following blindly a law that was essentially established at the behest of real estate and the construction industry. And now we have all these government bodies in a huge office in Sacramento paying lots of money just to make our state worse and our lives worse. So I'm looking for people who will stand up and confront the RHNA law at its root. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking. We appreciate your comments.
Are there any other members of the community who are here on site who would like to either ask a question of Jessie, of, you know, the information that she presented? So I guess Nathan, you've been waiting, so come on up.
A public, non-governmental, ignorant question. Can you please use full names of agencies, not acronyms, so that we can actually understand what these all mean? Because we don't know the alphabet soup you're using.
Certainly. I'm sorry about that. I am a planner, so I
It's
use
okay.
a lot of jargon, but I will do my best.
I think there was a hand raiser. Yes, sir. Please come on up.
It's a simple question. When did California establish this growth requirement for Santa Barbara County? And when was the population growth determined? A year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago?
So when was the growth number? Is,
Come up with a requirement for so many housing units. Where did that number come from? California?
so the question over Zoom, for folks in Zoom, is where did the number come from, the growth projections, or the number, the requirement?
How old is that number? Was there any pushback to the state to say, look, we're not growing that fast, or we allocate housing more slowly? Is there any, I didn't hear anything about the formula. Formula, when was it established by the state? Is there any pushback by the county that not necessarily complies?
Yes, so the question about methodology is a valid one. So every 8 years, the state comes out with the RHNA numbers and gives them to the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, RHNA numbers, and gives them to every council of governments to distribute to the jurisdictions within their area. So essentially, the RHNA numbers come out every 8 years, and they're based on the most recent census data. And I don't remember what specific jurisdictions have done this, but there have been some jurisdictions, some councils of governments that have pushed back on the RHNA numbers from the state on behalf of their jurisdictions, but it doesn't really get changed. The state hands the RHNA numbers to us, and we have to accommodate them. Yes, I believe it would be the 2020 census data in this case.
We have in person that wants to make a comment in Spanish. Her name is Zoila, so when you're ready, she's in person and Spanish speaker. Thank you.
Okay, Zoila?
Zoila, pase por favor.
Muy buenas noches.
Estar yo con usted. Adelante.
Buenas noches. Mi nombre es Zoila Cabrera.
Good evening, my name is Zoila Cabrera.
Esta tarde estoy presente.
This afternoon, I'm here present,
Gracias por esta información.
and thank you for this information.
Yo estoy esta tarde a favor, abogando por más viviendas.
I am here this afternoon, please, I'm on defense of wanting more dwellings, more housing.
Porque sabemos que tener una vivienda es un derecho.
Because we know that having a housing, it is a right.
Nuestros niños y niñas en general hemos pasado una dura pandemia.
Our kids, boys and girls, in general, we have gone through a very difficult pandemic.
Nuestros hijos, nietos han pasado han bajado de sus calificaciones después de un largo tiempo.
Our children, our grandchildren have lowered their grades in school because after a long time
Con la pandemia.
with the pandemic,
Estar en las tabletas
to be on the tablets,
que a veces ni podíamos entrar a clases
sometimes we couldn't even go to the schools
porque no había internet.
because we didn't have any internet.
Entonces yo pido y quiero
Therefore, I ask and I request and I want
que la Comisión de Planeamiento
that the Planning Commission
también apruebe
also approve
más construcciones de viviendas
more construction of
de
housing
bajos recursos
for the ones that have under incomes.
para calificar para una vivienda tenemos
So in order to qualify for what the housing, we'll have to
que hacer 70,000 al año
we have to make 70,000 a year
o 59,000 individual
or 59,000 individually.
perdón, para no hacer por no hacer esta cantidad de sueldo,
By not making this kind of salary,
a menos cuando son cocineros,
unless when they're cooks,
ayudantes de cocina,
kitchen help,
trabajadores de limpieza,
cleaning workers,
a lo mejor podríamos hacer un
maybe we
24,000
could
por
reach
año,
24,000 a year.
lo que ayuda los que ayudan atrás de la
The
cocina,
ones who help behind the kitchens,
que muchas veces ni los vemos,
and sometimes we don't even see those people.
lavando trastes,
They're cleaning, they're washing dishes,
lavando carros.
they're cleaning cars.
Yo pido que se hagan mejores viviendas
I ask that this new housing will be made better housing
para familias,
for families,
veteranos
for veterans,
que salen de las bases
for
militares,
those ones that come out of military bases.
que salen sin donde tener un techo,
They come out without having even a roof,
se retiran con sus familias.
and they have to retire with their own families.
Yo apoyo donde hay masacres vacíos,
I will support where there are more empty acres.
sean
acreage,
elegidos de prioridad para
to be chosen as
viviendas
priority for all
de-
this housing.
de bajos
For
recursos.
us, the lower income.
Soñamos
We dream
nuestros hijos y familias
that our kids and our family
tener un techo
to be
individual.
able to have a roof that is individual.
Gracias por escuchar.
Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zoila. We appreciate your comments.
More questions for Jesse from the group here in the room? From others who maybe haven't? Okay. Oh, sir. Yes, please.
I'm Tom Jackson from Carpinteria, and I just wondered if you could clarify, the maps that you put out showed yellow areas, and from what I understood you to say, that those were all areas that were studied by the staff, and the staff study indicated that there were no ecological problems for those, and also that you seem to suggest that those areas were also owned by parties that were willing to sell for development of housing. These are questions, I'm not accusing you of anything, but I wondered if you would address that, okay? Thank you.
Yes. So Selena will talk about this more in her portion of the presentation, but on the map that we recently released, we did have a layer in the map shown in yellow that represents all of the sites that staff looked at. And the yellow parcels in particular that you'll see on the map represent sites that the county looked at, but ultimately, for various reasons, decided were not appropriate for rezoning, at least not at this time. And those sites we did not contact those property owners to see if they were interested in rezoning. And just as another clarifying point as well, if the county were proposing to rezone a particular site, it does not mean that we are looking to buy the site from the property owner. That site would remain within the ownership of the existing property owner unless they decided to sell it.
Thank you, Jesse. And we have quite a few people waiting over Zoom to make comments. What we're going to do is we have until 8 o'clock here this evening. We have 2 more sections on the agenda, so we're going to proceed to present that, and we'll come back to your questions. We want to make sure we allow enough time for folks to ask questions and make comments. So I'm going to call on Brianna, who will present information that resulted from the housing survey.
Thank you, Esmeralda. My name is Brianna. I am a planner with the county, and I'm going to be talking about the housing survey that we conducted this spring and the results we got from it. We have the slides up. So as Jesse mentioned, county staff extensively reviewed all housing sites to assess for potential future housing development. Staff worked to identify the current capacity permitted in each site and where sites had room for growth. Throughout the process of analysis and research, staff was simultaneously conducting public outreach. Staff, with the help of the nonprofit The Promotores, conducted a housing conditions and needs survey to learn more about housing issues from community members' experiences. I will go into more detail about this on the following slides. Staff also created and released an informational video describing the housing element in both English and Spanish, which you can find on our website. Staff has sent various notifications via email, social media, and press release to inform the community on updates and events being hosted. Staff has also conducted various targeted meetings to learn more about housing needs from specific community groups. To further discuss community members' input on their housing needs within the county, I will discuss the survey that we conducted. Next slide, please. So this spring, the county collaborated with the Promotores Network to conduct a housing conditions and needs survey. The Promotores Network works to engage the underserved Spanish-speaking communities to improve community awareness about health and social issues that affect them. The Promotores members canvassed door-to-door in Spanish-speaking communities throughout the county to inform them on the survey and encourage them to provide feedback on their housing issues. The survey was available online and distributed as paper copies in English and Spanish. The responses from the survey were used to help the county better understand the housing needs of its residents and the pressures that its residents experience. The following information summarizes the results from the 538 surveys completed this spring. Next slide. The survey helped staff gain a better understanding of current housing conditions and experiences community members have. The results showed that the county is almost evenly split amongst homeowners and renters. 2% of respondents had other living conditions such as temporary housing or homelessness. Next slide. In regards to the types of homes people within the county are living in, the most common reported from the survey takers are single-family homes or condominiums. The second most common type of homes are multifamily buildings, such as apartments, duplexes, or townhomes. The third most common was mobile homes. People also reported living in accessory dwelling units, group housing, RVs, retirement homes, hotels, or experiencing homelessness. Next slide. People were asked how many rooms were in their home except for kitchens, bathrooms, and uninhabited garages. Most people reported having 2 bedrooms. The second most common had 3 bedrooms, and the third most common had 1 bedroom. Next slide. The majority of county residents reported sharing a home with a partner or spouse. People reported their children as the second and third most common people they share a home with. Other county residents also reported sharing their home with non-relatives. Next slide. To gain a better understanding of the typical living arrangements within the county, the survey asked people how many others they share a home with. The majority of respondents stated that they live with 1 other person. The second most common home arrangement consists of more than 4 people living together. People living in a home alone was the least common arrangement reported. Next slide. At the time of the survey, Santa Barbara County's average median income for a family of 4 was $90,100. We wanted to gain a sense of how community members were reporting their incomes in relation to this average. 54% of respondents' households have an average annual income less than this average. 41% of respondents' households had an average annual income of this average or more, while 5% declined to state their response. Next slide. As Jesse mentioned, ensuring there is enough housing available in regards to all income levels is important for the county to arrange. Through the survey, we were able to gain a sense of what people were paying monthly for their rent or mortgage payment throughout the whole county. Of those who responded, the majority of people stated that they pay between $1,000 to $1,499 per month on their rent or mortgage. The second most common monthly rent payment was less than $1,000 per month. The third most common rent payment tied between the range of $1,500 to $1,999 per month, with the rent payment of $3,000 or more per month. Various others reported that their homes are paid off. Next slide. The South Coast region specifically has the highest housing costs and rent prices in the county. For example, rent prices typically start at over $2,000 per month. Home values in the South Coast typically range from $1 million to $4 million. Due to the high housing costs, a significant portion of residents are cost burdened. If a household is cost burdened, this means they pay more than 30% of their income on housing. If a household is severely cost burdened, this means they pay more than 50% of their income on housing expenses. In the South Coast region, 62% of renters are cost burdened or pay more than 30% of their income on housing. 41% of homeowners are cost burdened. Next slide. In addition to learning about people's average rent payments, we were able to learn about the conditions of people's homes and the issues they have with them. The majority of people stated that their homes are in good condition or need some repairs. The least amount of people reported needing serious repairs to their homes. Next slide. The most common home hazards reported by people are shown here. The most common hazard reported was poor plumbing or heating. The second most common hazard reported was excessive dust, followed by excessive noise and mold or mildew. People also reported experiencing exposure to excessive heat, exposure to pesticides, and exposure to air pollution. Next slide. Based on the living arrangements and housing conditions residents currently experience, we wanted to see if residents had a desire to move elsewhere within Santa Barbara County within the next 5 years. The results show that the majority of people would prefer to remain in their current homes, while some do have a desire to move elsewhere. Next slide. We wanted to learn more about the reasons behind people's desires to move. The majority of people shared that the main reason they'd wish to move was because current housing costs are too high. People also felt their current housing is too small or too large for their needs. People also expressed desires to purchase a home instead of renting, or to live closer to their place of work or school. Next slide. The survey helped us gain a better understanding of what types of homes people are looking for. Most people shared that they prefer a single-family home or condominium. Various others share that a multi-family home, accessory dwelling unit, or mobile home is their preference. Next slide. In addition to the types of homes people preferred, people shared their preferences of owning or renting. Most people shared that they'd prefer to buy their next home, with the minority preferring to rent. Next slide. For people who expressed they'd like to buy a home but felt they could not do so, we wanted to hear more about the reasons why. The main sentiment people shared as roadblocks to home purchasing was housing costs being too high. People also shared that they could not afford down payments, mortgages, or other costs. Next slide. People were encouraged to leave any additional comments they had in regards to housing within the county. Many comments were left regarding several topics related to accessory dwelling units, affordable housing, housing costs, the need for more housing, agricultural housing, rentals, and homelessness. All comments are being reviewed by staff and are being taken into consideration as further work on the housing element develops. Next slide. And that concludes our section on the survey.
Any questions on what Brianna just presented? Nathan? Yeah. So, and we are monitoring the Zoom. I don't see any new hands raised on this topic. So, questions about the survey?
Hi, Nathan Pratt again. You said you had a survey of 583 people or something? 538. Okay, the wrong way, sorry. And how many residents are there in the county of Santa Barbara? approximately?
About 450,000.
Okay, so do you feel that that survey is a representative survey based on the population of the county?
No, we do not feel that. We did receive closer to 1,000 responses, but we had to filter them out to make sure that they were within the unincorporated county areas and not city areas.
Right.
So there was a lot of more answers, but we couldn't factor those into our survey. But for different data points, we are looking more at census data, American Community Survey data, other factors, not just this survey response, to show the whole county picture.
I mean, I don't know how important this survey is to your decision-making process, but if you're going to do a survey and use it for your decision-making process, I think it's incumbent upon staff in the county and government to do a decent survey and hire a professional group with the resources to actually maybe survey at least a few % of the population, if that's possible.
As a reminder, this particular survey was just a snapshot of the county, and we did do a pretty narrow focus on typically underserved Spanish-speaking communities that typically don't have a voice at the table at some of these other meetings and public forums.
Right, okay. I was just wondering what this puzzle, because it seemed like it's such a small sample. I was just going, what's the story here?
Just to give us a sense of some of the housing needs in certain areas that we may not otherwise know or hear from. That was really the intent of the
Okay,
survey.
thank you, great.
Okay, maybe just one or two questions. Yes. Sí, por favor. And then we'll move on to rezones after any additional questions about the survey.
Sí, por favor. Buenas noches todos.
Good evening for everyone.
Mi nombre es María Otero y soy promotora de salud.
My name is Maria Otero, and I'm a health provider.
Como promotora de salud tenemos contacto con mucha comunidad en la ciudad
As a promoter of health, we have a lot of contact with people in the community.
y como latinos también tenemos como comparación o ver cómo
And among Latins, we can also make
comprensión
comparison
más bien de ver las necesidades de nuestra
to
comunidad.
be able to see what are the needs of our communities.
Y mi pregunta en este caso, bueno, es un contexto que estuve mirando ahorita después,
My question, and
cuando
but this is in the context of what I have been seeing
mientras escuchaba.
while I was listening.
Y lo que yo observo en la ciudad es que hay muchas personas, muchos indigentes.
What I observed that in the city there is a lot of indigent people.
Entonces son los homeless que están sacados de donde estaba el freeway, lo que están
The
arreglando.
homeless are being moved from where the freeway was. They're fixing that.
Y quisiera, el mes pasado, el principio del año, supe que estaba una compañía haciendo unas unidades pequeñas para los homeless por la calle Santa Bárbara.
And at the beginning of the year, I came to find out that there was a company that were doing small buildings around in ¿qué área?
Santa Bárbara.
In Santa Barbara.
Ya en la calle Santa Bárbara.
In Santa Barbara
Pero
Street.
son 10 unidades de 9 por 9 pies.
There are 10 units of 9 by
Es-
9 feet.
Yo sé que es nada, tal vez el tamaño del closet de algunas de las personas que están aquí.
Maybe it's the size of some of your closets of
¿Verdad?
the persons that you're here present today.
Entonces, en ese aspecto, mi pregunta es,
En
¿hay
that
algún
aspect-
plan para reubicar a las indigentes?
My question is, do you have a plan to relocate these people, my people?
Entonces, yo creo que tenemos que ver la parte humana
We have to look upon the human face, or the human part.
y comprender también, por ejemplo, si alguien ha caminado por la calle Cuarentina, por donde está el correo,
You have to understand, if any one of you have walked on Quarantina Street with the
Puede-
post offices,
pueden ver cuántos indigentes hay ahí con necesidad de vivienda, de
you
comida,
can
de
see how
salud.
many indigent people we have with health needs, food needs,
Y no podemos ser indiferentes
We
a
can't
ese
be
dolor y a
indifferent
esas
to that
necesidades.
pain, to those needs.
Y otro punto es,
My other point,
los precios de la vivienda son tan altos
the
en
prices of
Santa Bárbara
housing is so high in Santa Barbara,
y de las rentas,
and the rent,
que los padres descuidan a sus hijos porque tienen 3 trabajos a veces para poder
the
cubrir sus
parents now
gastos.
are not taking care of their kids. Why? Because they need to have 3 jobs to be able to fulfill their needs.
Poder ajustar sus pagos de renta,
To be
servicios,
able to pay the
salud,
rent, to pay the
comida,
services,
ropa.
meals, clothing.
Entonces quisiera saber si hay
So I would like to know.
algún plan para ello,
If you have a plan for this,
si hubiera forma
If
de
there's a
que,
way.
ahora que hablaban del mobile homes y eso,
you talk about motorhomes and all that thing.
puedo estar equivocada, pero
Maybe
sé
I'm
que
wrong.
California no acepta que las personas traigan de otros lados un mobile home para vivir.
California doesn't allow to have
Entonces,
people
eso
bring their
sería
motorhome
una
into
forma
California to live in. I thought that this is not
de
allowed.
ayudar a estas familias que
Is there
tengan
any way
un
we
modo
can
de
help
vivir.
that they need a place to live or a way to live?
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
To take a quick stab at answering some of those questions or responding to the comments.
Let me connect myself.
Oh, sure. No, you may not. All right. But in short, sure. Okay. In short, yes, the housing element is going to address the housing needs of the entire community, and specifically, we do have to include a section on the housing needs of homeless individuals within the unincorporated county. And this analysis has to analyze how many persons there are without shelter within the county. We also have to demonstrate where there is existing shelters and resources available for the homeless and where we have additional capacity to add various types of temporary or permanent shelters for the homeless.
And I wanted to mention that our Community Services Department has a housing division, and they are working on a homeless plan to bring people out of homelessness. And so the speaker commented on a facility that was recently developed by the county by a company called, in collaboration with the county, by a company called Dignity Moves. And there are these small, very small units that the county has purchased to bring people out of homelessness and get them into shelter. And so CSD is the department that's working on that homeless plan. And I do just want to give a plug in for the housing authorities. The city housing authority and the county housing authority have done a tremendous job on building housing throughout our community to pull people out of homelessness, get them the services that they need, transition them into the next level of housing, help them get jobs. So there are services in our community, but it's not enough. And so we're doing as much as we possibly can, but I do want to encourage you to connect with Community Services and their housing division, because they are focusing on that, the solutions for the homeless problem.
Okay, thank you. So we do have a few people over Zoom who have been waiting. So we're going to take a couple comments, but we do want to get to the rezones. So we'll start calling folks there. So we're going to go to Kyle Richards.
Hello, I'm Kyle Richards. I'm a Goleta resident, and I also serve as a city council member from the city of Goleta. I want to acknowledge, first of all, that the county's under a lot of pressure, I understand, from the state to ensure that there's enough land zoned to accommodate the requirements under RENA. Like the city of Goleta and our other regional neighbors, we're also working hard to meet the state's requirements to zone for enough housing in our area. And we share the county's goal of ensuring that there is an ample amount of housing, particularly affordable and workforce housing, to accommodate the needs of our area. However, we also believe that the city of Goleta should have a say in a planning process that may result in inevitable impacts to the city and our residents. A sound planning process would include input from the city and those affected by potential development in order to minimize and mitigate the negative impacts on our community. In the spirit of cooperation and collaboration, the city of Goleta is eager to work with the county as a partner and even a resource. We have a lot of questions regarding the county's investigation into the rezoning of agricultural parcels in the immediate vicinity of the city, and we look forward to receiving more information that helps us better understand where the county is in its process. As you may know, the city of Goleta was among the first Santa Barbara County jurisdiction to submit our draft housing plan back in June, and we have worked hard to analyze all of the available sites in our city, including vacant and underutilized properties in residential zones as well as commercial zones. It is our hope that the county can avoid the upzoning of properties, in particular agricultural land, in areas adjacent to the city in order to reduce unwanted negative impacts. Moving forward, we hope to work together to create more affordable housing in our community in a way that is thoughtful and minimizes and mitigates the negative impacts on Goleta and incorporates concepts that are consistent with our community's goals of creating a walkable and bikeable community that is not car dependent. We will be submitting comments through this process after our staff has been able to fully evaluate the county's proposal, and Goleta will advocate strongly on behalf of our residents to see that our quality of life is not degraded by this process. Thank you.
We look forward to receiving comments from the city of Goleta, so thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Let's go to Stuart over Zoom.
Thank you. So I had a question on that first presentation that you provided, and I was curious, the presentation described separate allocations for North and South County, and it described it as being made by SBCAG. That is for the person in the audience, the Santa Barbara County Office of Government, what is it? In any case, how much of that action was discretionary? How much of that allocation between North and South County was discretionary? And most importantly, can it be altered? Because the distribution, obviously, it's 70% to South County and 30% to North County is obviously unbalanced, and there are big consequences as a result. And when we talk about zoning, I'll have a few other comments, but I wanted to know our options at this point. Can that be adjusted if we, as needed? How much flexibility is there? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that comment question. My name is Dan Clement. I'm Deputy Director of the Long Range Planning Division. I worked on behalf of the county when the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, or SBCAG, and bureaucraties, worked with the local jurisdictions based upon information and negotiations that they had previously conducted with the state to give us our preliminary numbers. So what happened was, prior to the adoption of the RHNA here for the Santa Barbara County, SBCAG staff works with state staff to determine what will be a reasonable range of numbers for the county. And they take into consideration a number of items, everything from population projections, and then also new state requirements with regard to things like making sure the distribution of houses is done in such a way that it reduces vehicle miles traveled with the intent of contributing to greenhouse gases. That's why, as explained earlier, the distribution occurred between the north and the south, knowing that there's a jobs housing imbalance in the area. And then what happens is after SBCAG works with state HCD, they come up with numbers which they then present to the local jurisdictions. And then we considered that, and then those numbers were actually presented to SBCAG's board of directors, who then makes a recommendation as to whether or not they will accept those numbers, and then ultimately it's submitted to the state, and the state authorizes that. That procedure has ended. There's not the opportunity now to go back and revisit the RHNA numbers. SBCAG's made that decision. The state has certified the numbers. We are now in the process where we must plan for the units that were identified in those numbers.
We're going to take a couple more people over Zoom, and I just also want to remind everyone here in person and over Zoom that we are capturing everything, so please feel free to use the sheets that we made available for those of you who are here in person. And over Zoom, please make sure if you have comments, you can type them into the chat, and that will be transmitted to staff for them to review. So let's go to Sharon next over Zoom. Okay, so let's go to Leanne.
Hi, thank you. I live here in the city of Carpinteria, and I was just wondering if you could further explain the penalties to us and what that would entail if we don't comply?
Yes, so there are several penalties that can result from the county not complying with state mandates, including the requirement to update our housing element and accommodate our RENA. One of the biggest penalties we face is that the county can lose its permitting authority, meaning that we would no longer be in control of any permits, residential permits that would come through the county. Developers would just go straight to the state and go through their permitting authority. Also, there are potential legal ramifications, including the fact that the state attorney general could come and impose certain types of fines and other penalties on the county.
There's also loss of grant funding, and then, of course, the use by right, so that people can come in and develop with ministerial permits, truly ministerial permits that are not appealable. And there are numerous ones. There's something else called the builder's remedy as well, if you don't comply. And that offers an avenue for people to develop regardless of the zoning that's in place or your standards that are in your zoning code. So they're pretty substantial and can be quite severe. So which is why most jurisdictions in California are eager to try and identify locations and plan for future housing and not run afoul of the state.
Got it. Thank you. Wow, that's scary.
Thank you. We're going now to our next topic, which is going over the rezones, and Selena will review that. For those of you who are waiting over Zoom, we will come back to that and resume our Q&A for that at that point, and then also in person too. We want to make sure we get to everyone, but please feel free to type in your questions and your comments in the chat. We'll make sure we're saving all of that too. And then if you're here in person, make sure you jot those down on your comment sheets.
Hi, everyone. My name is Selena Evilsizer Whitney. I'm another senior planner here in Long Range Planning, and now we will talk about the maps. I'm going to talk about the process, the methodology that we used, and then give you a very brief introduction to the map, and then we will actually hone in on the specific sites in the South Coast that are identified as potential rezones. Before I do, though, I want to iterate that this is the first draft that we just finished preparing last week of the map. We released it as soon as we could, and it is definitely still available for tweaking, commenting, editing. Sites can be added, removed as the process goes on. So this is the first draft. We wanted to bring it to you for input, discussion, deliberation, so that we can move forward throughout this process and feel like we can give as much opportunity as we can, given everything that we all are considering as part of the housing element update. So, real quick, I'm going to provide just a couple of definitions and background information, and then I'll talk about the methodology we use to narrow the funnel down from all potential sites down to sites that met the criteria for potential rezones. Then we'll talk about the map and specific sites in the South Coast. Next slide, please. So first, just a few definitions. When we say rezone, we mean a change in the legal use of property, so from one allowed use or type of allowed uses to another type of allowed uses. Sometimes the rezone can actually allow more uses on a site, allow more flexibility on a site. So for example, a site could be zoned for commercial uses now, allowing, stores and offices, but it could be potentially rezoned to a residential zone, so it would allow houses and condos and other types of residential units. When I talk about upzoning, I mean a change in the intensity of use. So For example, a site that allows some residential uses could be upzoned, so it could allow more residential uses, a higher housing density, which is the last term I wanted to define. And by that I mean the number of units that are allowed on a site or the number of housing units per acre. And so a housing unit is just one dwelling, so one house or one townhome or one apartment building or one ADU. This slide, next slide, shows some examples of different types of housing at different housing densities. Typically, detached houses are at a density of around less than 6 units per acre. Low-density multifamily buildings like duplexes, triplexes, courtyard apartments are between 8 to 25 dwelling units per acre. Higher-density multifamily buildings like townhouses or courtyard building are typically between 20 to 50 dwelling units per acre. So just some context. And one thing I wanted to note, that sites that are rezoned to a residential zone as part of the housing element update to help meet our required RHNA must allow, per state housing element law, must allow at least 20 housing units per acre. 20 housing units per acre allows for what are called missing middle housing types like duplexes, triplexes, courtyard apartments, lower multifamily, but a more like moderate density multifamily. Next slide. Ms. Steele gave a really good explanation of the regional housing needs allocation or RHNA process, but I want to reiterate just a couple of points that drove this rezone analysis. As she mentioned, the county's total RHNA was broken into North County and South County subregions, and for the rest of tonight, we'll just be focusing on South County. The county needs to accommodate over 4,000 total housing units in the unincorporated South Coast areas outside of the cities. Almost 3,000 of the new homes in the South Coast must be affordable to households in the lower and moderate income categories. County staff's assessment of all of the currently available land under existing zoning in the South Coast areas found that there's not enough land suitably zoned to meet the requirements for any of the household income categories, as Jesse showed you on the tables. We do have a severe shortfall of approximately 3,500 new housing units. It is a very large number, as we all agree. Next slide. So what was this process that staff used to try to set some parameters and criteria for what sites might be suitable for rezoning? In the South Coast, we looked at hundreds of sites. We started with sites that are currently vacant, and we also looked at some that are partially developed or could be redeveloped. We looked at commercial sites, shopping centers, sites owned by religious organizations. We looked at anything we could think of. County land owned by the county. We focused on sites that are within or directly next to existing urban areas and that are also close to jobs and existing services. We also tried to focus on sites that could obtain water and wastewater services. Next slide. So in the South Coast subregion overall, there are currently 26 sites total that are shown on the map as potential sites that could be rezoned or upzoned. There are 11 in Carpinteria Valley, 11 in Eastern Goleta Valley, and 4 others that are kind of near the city of Santa Barbara boundaries or right next to the city of Goleta boundaries, just north of it. However, I want to state again, we cast as broad of a net as we could to try to give options for deliberation and discussion. Not all of the sites that are shown as potential rezones will ultimately be rezoned, or if they are, they may not be rezoned to the housing density that's shown on the map as of today. We wanted to be able to give the public and decision makers options to figure out how to meet this RHNA that we need to meet. Next slide. So the County Planning and Development Department prepared an interactive map. Some of you have seen it. It shows areas of the county that are under consideration for rezoning as part of the county's housing element update specifically. You can go to the map and see different areas of the county where sites may be rezoned. You can type in your address to see sites near you. The interactive map also shows pending housing projects that we know about at this time. So those are housing projects that have been proposed or applicants have submitted for permits, but they're not actually completely constructed yet. And the reason that we're showing those is because once those housing units are built, we can count those housing units toward our RHNA. The map also shows those yellow sites that I will show you in just a second. Those are all of the sites that we looked at, and that's really just for your informational purposes, just so you know, if you're curious. You can access the map by visiting the County Housing Element webpage. For those of you on Zoom, it's being placed into the chat right now. And there's also a link up here. So you can go see it on your phone as well. It works on computers and phones. And now I'm going to show you how the map works. And we will use Carpinteria Valley as our example. This is an example of what you see when you open the map. This is a portion of Carpinteria Valley. The black lines are the legal parcels, and the grayed out area is the city of Carpinteria. And I want to be clear, in the map you can zoom in, zoom out, rotate all over the county. The green and orange sites shown here are potential rezones, and don't worry, I will zoom into those on the next few slides. The purple sites are the proposed housing projects that I mentioned, and the yellow sites are parcels that we examine to see if they should be or could be potential rezone sites. So I will zoom in closer now to focus on the rezone sites specifically. So this is an example of a potential rezone site. When you're on the map and you click on the site, a details box will pop up that will show you information on the site and currently and the potential zoning change. I'll talk more about this specific site in just one second because I want to explain the difference between the green rezone parcels in the Carpinteria Valley and the orange rezone parcels. And Carp Valley is the only community at this time that has green and orange parcels, and I'm going to explain that. They're both potential rezone sites, but the next slide will give a better idea. So the green rezone sites mean that the site is a potential rezone, and the housing units from that potential rezone are being counted toward the county's RHNA target at this time. The orange sites are also potential rezone sites, but they have more constraints that make them less likely to actually be rezoned and fully developed by the year 2031, because 2031 is the end of our 8-year housing element cycle, and so that's when we're supposed to meet our RHNA targets. So therefore, county staff at this time is not counting potential housing units from the orange rezone sites toward the county's RHNA target at this time. But as I said, we want to provide options for discussion, and so that's why both the green and the orange sites are shown on the map right now. As the map is refined during the housing element process, the orange sites may become green sites, the green sites may become orange sites, or they may fall off the map entirely as we move through and figure out how can we get to where we need to be. These two sites in particular, so now I'm going to focus in on talking about the actual sites. These two potential rezone sites are just north of the city of Carpinteria along Foothill Road. They are both currently zoned for and used for agriculture. Although both sites are both in the coastal zone, requiring Coastal Commission certification to actually effectuate the rezone. The green site may have fewer barriers to rezoning because it has existing development on nearly 3 sides, including the high school, Boys and Girls Club, bike path, and residential development. Also, a local affordable housing nonprofit is working with the landowner to explore affordable housing and possibly an early start childhood education center. Next slide. Since I used Carpinteria Valley to show you how the map works, I'll finish talking about the rest of the potential rezone sites within Carp Valley first. On the eastern side, these 4 parcels are adjacent to the city boundary, just north of Highway 101 and next to or close to Casitas Pass Road. These parcels are all currently zoned for and used for agriculture. Due to their proximity to developed areas and existing services, they are shown as potential rezones and could accommodate multifamily housing, but they do have constraints such as existing agriculture usage and the location within the coastal zone that may make it harder to have the rezone certified by the Coastal Commission. Next slide. These are the remaining rezone sites, potential rezone sites, in the Carpinteria Valley area that are shown on the interactive map. They all are currently zoned and currently used for agriculture, and all are within the coastal zone. They could be rezoned to accommodate multifamily housing or a mix of for sale and for rent housing, or a mix of single family and multifamily. Again, they all have some barriers to being rezoned for residential uses because they are all in the coastal zone and all are currently used for and currently zoned for and being used for agriculture. However, they are adjacent to existing urban areas and existing services. The green parcel is being explored for affordable and farm worker housing with a local affordable housing nonprofit, so that's why it's colored green instead of orange on the map. Next slide. So on the rest of the map, there are no other orange sites. They're all green. I'm going to move to the west to show potential rezones in eastern Goleta Valley. These 3 sites are along Hollister Avenue, just west of Turnpike Road. They are all currently zoned and used for agriculture, but they are located within the defined urbanized area and are close to existing amenities and services. They are all outside of the coastal zone. The interactive map shows them as potentially being rezoned to accommodate multifamily housing. Next slide. These are the other cluster of parcels in eastern Goleta Valley that are currently zoned and used for agriculture uses, but are potential rezones as part of this effort. They are all located within the existing urbanized areas. They are outside of the coastal zone. They can accommodate multifamily housing, and they are close to existing jobs and services. I want to iterate again that these parcels are shown as a cluster because they met the criteria that's been established so far to identify potential rezones. But again, this is a draft plan, and we do have a bit of wiggle room in the South Coast, not a lot, but a bit, to sort out the most appropriate sites and densities for rezoning. Next slide. So this next site is a county property. It's the county's existing juvenile hall site. It's along it's along Hollister Avenue. It is currently being used, but the county has started a master planning process for its county facilities along Cayo Real and Hollister Avenue to figure out how to best redevelop those areas. And as part of that master planning process, some areas of the county campuses are being identified as future workforce housing areas. So this site is being considered for future workforce housing. The existing juvenile hall would be demolished and multifamily housing would be constructed at this location if this site is contained on the rezone list for the housing element update. Next slide. These 3 sites are owned by local religious organizations and are close to or right next to the city of Santa Barbara's northern boundaries. They are near Highway 154 and Foothill Road. They are each currently zoned for low-density residential or single-family residential, and they are shown as potential rezones to allow multifamily housing. And finally, the last site in the South Coast area is the Glen Annie Golf Course site just north of the city of Goleta at the corner of Glen Annie and Cathedral Oaks. It is shown as a potential rezone. The site is currently in an agricultural zone, but it is used for recreational purposes. It is large enough to accommodate some single-family and multifamily housing, plus some open space and potentially neighborhood-serving commercial, since it is such a large site. Next slide. So this is, as Esmeralda mentioned in the beginning, this is our first touch point with these maps and this information, and there will be many more ahead. This slide just lists a few key touch points. We expect to release the draft housing element for public review in February or March, and there will be a month. It'll be provided for at least a month for public review, and we'll be taking it to the County Planning Commission for their review and deliberation. We are also hoping to hold more focused listening sessions on specific topics under the umbrella of housing next winter and spring after we have the draft housing element released for public review. We are also, as Jesse mentioned, preparing an environmental impact report, and that draft will definitely be made available for public review as well. Steps you can take now include reviewing the interactive map, providing feedback to us on it. At last night's workshop, we actually got some feedback on another layer we should add, which is clearly identifying county-owned land. So if you have ideas for just how we could make the map itself more effective, in addition to information, feedback on specific sites, if you have a site that you think would be a great site for a rezone, do you own it or have an idea, it's not too late to add additional sites as well. You can submit your comments or questions, of course, here tonight, but then also through the housing element at countyofsb.org email address that goes out to the whole team. And please, please, please sign up for future project notifications. The website is shown up here, but also on your way out the door, if you're here in person, there's a sign-up sheet. You can scan the QR code and sign up yourself. Or when you go home, if you're on Zoom now, you can Google Santa Barbara County Housing Element Update, and there's a link to sign yourself up for all the future project notifications and listening sessions and hearings and events. This concludes the presentation portion, and now we will begin the rest of the facilitated discussion. Thank you.
So we have a few folks over Zoom who've been waiting, so we're going to go to Jonathan first, and then Mike, Stuart, and Femina. Jonathan?
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate your help. I just wanted to let you all know that I'm a Montecito lifelong resident. I had a couple quick clarifications since there was like 3 pieces of these questions relate to all 3 pieces. So excuse me if I'm a little bit long-winded. Someone said that there's a use by right for multifamily if there is 20% or more of low income. That's part of that multifamily. So that's something I'd like to get addressed. Most of my other questions kind of goes through a little bit more in depth of, like everybody else is saying, I mean, I'm a Montecito resident, but why wasn't Montecito considered, at all? I mean, basically, or Hope Ranch. I mean, basically they're barely considered for extra housing despite having larger average parcel sizes. They have vacant and partially developed land or underdeveloped land. They're an existing urban area. They're close to or they provide jobs themselves. And they're close to services. They have water and wastewater services. Why wasn't the affordable housing overlay kind of adjusted to allow for more than just 2 of the 4 zones in Montecito for residential use? Why wasn't Montecito and Hope Ranch allowed additional ADUs or workforce housing, since many people work in Montecito, or provide services in Montecito? why didn't they reconsider rezoning Old Spanish Town to E2 or to a new overlay that allows for the same heights as E1 but multifamily density? Because Old Spanish Town in Montecito already has multiple parcels with multiple residential structures on them that have been existing since predating zoning in Montecito 1929. So something to definitely consider. I don't know why you're pushing so hard for Carpinteria. It's the most dated electrical infrastructure in our county, and your entire analysis didn't take into account electrical grid. It looks at water and wastewater, but when you're pushing to electric vehicles, switching to electric because they're pushing away from natural gas, heating's pushing away because there's natural gas that's being pushed out. This is something to really take into consideration, especially with SB9. The county should not be focusing on looking at individual parcels, but looking at like larger, more systemic kind of concepts to look at housing, especially with SB9 coming in, allowing ADUs, maybe more than just one ADU in certain instances. I know that's usually for multifamily, but consider that as a change. Like I said, the affordable housing overlay needs to be addressed. My other question is in common is St. Vincent's has no parking. Your EIR is going to get destroyed when you have to park a half a mile from your house in order to like put food in, to actually have a car. And then also, I don't know why even Mount Carmel Church was considered an opportunity for housing, but I thought that was just kind of funny. So I wanted to end it on a lighter note, but it's kind of, in a sense, kind of disgusting that Goleta and Carpinteria were focused on, but neglected some of the largest average parcel sizes that have the most workforce on site on an average hour basis per workday. And, people could live where they work in Hope Ranch and in Montecito. There's tons of caretakers, landscaping crew, construction workers that, service those areas that would love to live way closer than they do currently. So something to consider that has not been considered and that meets all the criteria that is required. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. So I guess just, we do have quite a few speakers left here, and we're trying to get to everyone, and we will. We will also have follow-up information on the website. We're recording the Zoom meetings and this meeting, the hybrid meeting, and also making sure we're capturing all of the chat that's going to be saved and all of your comments that are written. So we're asking folks to maybe provide maybe your top level, summarizing your questions. We're going to get to them. So what I heard in that question was, how was, I guess, the decision made, I guess, high level, and that's probably Selena too, just the methodology for the site selection for the rezones, and then other comments were related to impacts and specifically with some of the sites that were mentioned, and one of them was, I think, St. Vincent. So we'll go there, and then we have about almost 10 people waiting over Zoom too.
All right. So to address the question about why didn't we look at Montecito and Hope Ranch, the answer is we did, and we just found that those areas generally did not meet the selection criteria that we started out with for looking for potential rezone sites, and there's a few reasons for that. One being extremely high land values, but we all know that's not much of a that is pretty common in the South Coast in general, but in those particular areas we do have extremely high land values. We also do have some criteria that's set by the State Department of Housing and Community Development, or State HCD. They have a guide that they have given to jurisdictions for selecting sites for potential rezones. And in that, they do have a range of parcel sizes, uses, and other things that they're looking at, such as location. And at least for Montecito and Hope Ranch, most of the sites that we looked at there were already developed, and State HCD has some pretty strict criteria as to what needs to happen and what evidence needs to be provided if we are going to suggest redevelopment of sites. But we did look at the Montecito Commercial Corridor, we looked at Hope Ranch, areas near Moore Mesa, and for a variety of reasons and environmental constraints, we did not end up selecting many sites at this time in those areas, but we can certainly reconsider in the future.
Great. So a few more people over Zoom. Just want to remind folks that we are aware of time, but we want to get to everyone. And if you can summarize your comments and use the sheet that's been provided here in person or the chat to expand on that, that will be part of the record, and we'll get to everyone here. So let's go to Mike next over Zoom.
Yes, a couple of quick comments and questions. In Carpinteria, why is the North Baylor property listed as pending when there's not even a complete application and it's outside the urban boundary and would require a rezone? And then more generally, the environmental scoping document for the housing element update states that growth be focused within existing urban areas, would minimize conversion of ag and open space lands, especially outside the urban rural boundary line. But in the Carp Valley, there are 12 green and orange areas outside the urban boundary line. In the rest of the county, not just South Coast, the rest of the county, there's exactly one Glen Eddie Golf Club in Goleta that's outside the urban boundary line. That is seriously out of balance. And then further, why were so many similar sites to the ones proposed for rezone not even examined, meaning they're white on the map? For example, the 3700 to 3900 blocks of Villarreal, the area just west of Franciscan Village on Villarreal. Why were they not even considered? So those are kind of my questions. Thank you.
So I was trying to track all those questions as you were going, but with regard to the question about why do we mark the Baylord Avenue project as a pending project shown in purple on the map, it's because they have approached the county with plans for this site, and in fact, it's a county housing authority site that they're working on with. Whether we are working with them on this project. So for that reason, we included the potential units and listed it as a potential rezone on our map, a pending project on our map.
Yeah, it does not say potential rezone. It says pending project. It is not, it needs to be rezoned.
Actually, with this particular one, the county is, oh, we're not doing that one, just kidding. Yes, it's a pending project. It's shown in purple on the map. I think they are doing a rezone, but they're doing that on their own as part of their project, the County Housing Authority.
There's not a rezone agenda item on the county agenda yet, so it's not yet rezoned.
No, it is not yet. They're
Okay,
still
thank you.
in the early planning stages. And I believe you asked a question about the EIR and, I'm sorry, could you repeat? And
Why are there 12 potential rezones outside the urban boundary line in Carpinteria Valley and one in the rest of the county?
In general,
when maintaining the urban boundary line is so important according to the county's policy.
it absolutely is. There are a lot of policy considerations that go into converting area outside of the urban area and bringing it into the urban area, and it's something that we are trying to avoid if at all possible. However, given the large RHNA that we have to accommodate and the need to equitably distribute the RHNA across the South Coast, we are having to expand our search to other areas. But I think that kind of leads into your third question. I heard about like why do we not examine some sites in Carpinteria? They're shown in white on the map. If you would like to email us or repeat the locations of those sites, we'll absolutely look into it. We're open to suggestions.
Well, everything, it's including the 3700 to 3900 block on Villarreal, west of Franciscan Village along Villarreal. There's a number of white sites that, just looking at them, some of the yellow sites that were considered and ruled out are just kind of odd compared to these ones. Well, I guess the question is, how did you choose which sites to examine and which sites to not even consider?
As we've discussed, I'm Alan Bell with the Planning Department. As we discussed, we did have a methodology that we went through in terms of looking at sites and how we would go about prioritizing the ones to examine. I mean, we have thousands and thousands of parcels in the county. So we had to go through a methodology to begin focusing down on the sites that would be most likely to develop. Ms. Steele has explained that one of the critical things we looked at is and focused on are vacant properties. Vacant properties are ones that could be readily developed. If we look at properties that are going to be redeveloped, that is, properties that have existing structures on them, whether they're houses or commercial uses, the state sets a very, very high standard for counting those and places a burden on the jurisdiction, that is the county, to demonstrate that those properties would be developed within the 8-year period. And that's a great burden, and oftentimes just simply isn't possible. That's why, for example, when we looked at some of the properties in Montecito and even in the commercial areas, there was just a lot of developed properties, but we had no assurances or no responses from property owners that were interested in actually redeveloping those properties.
Okay, thank you. So just want to be respectful of everyone's time. It's almost 8 o'clock. The meeting was published to end at 8, but we will continue to get your feedback. Just also want to encourage you to summarize your comments. Make sure you include your full comments in written form on the sheets and then also in the chat. And also, there are different perspectives, by all of you, community members, participants. So just, no clapping. You can support your fellow community members in other ways by raising your hand and others. So we're going to take a couple more over Zoom, and then we'll go to the room here. So let's go to Stuart and then Fermina.
Okay, so thank you. And first, let me point out, I understand that the county has a major challenge in achieving its RHNA targets. I accept that. But I think this is, as Mr. Bell described, and perhaps with some state impositions, the way we're doing it seems wrong to me. To start with, in 2009, Goleta applied to LAFCO to expand its boundaries and include some of the same properties that are under consideration now, Glen Annie, Georgie, other ag properties, and they were turned down. They were turned down because there was a need to protect the agricultural lands. And since then, we've not gone ahead to try and alter our boundaries, our sphere of influence. We didn't have a desire to convert lands from ag and open space outside. We wanted to create a green belt around the city. We wanted to stop sprawl. And we wanted to create a safer environment that would protect against wildfires. So where we are now is we have these lands that have been left there with the assumption that LAFCO and the county were intent on keeping these lands preserved and preserved safe from development. Lo and behold, surprisingly, we discover now a different part of the county has decided that indeed these lands that have been left there will be developed because they're available, these nice open spaces. I think it's important to recognize we, the city of Goleta, and I'm speaking as a council member, but not for the city as a whole or anything like that. But we've in the past 10 years have provided over 1,500 units in and around the city. And we're talking again about providing another few hundred shortly, potentially. We've protected our ag lands through measure G2012 to keep them safe. So we've been pushing to try and fulfill the mandates that we've been given by the state and the county in terms of focusing on infill, protecting our agricultural lands, creating green belts. And where we are now is the county is intent, it seems, on undoing all that work. Some of the properties that are being considered, especially I think the golf course there, it's surprising, let's say that. Already, and SBCAG is perfectly aware of this, we have massive amounts of cars waiting on the 101 to exit there. They back up during rush hour going all the way to the next exit. It's an accident waiting to happen. SBCAG is aware of it, but different part of SBCAG apparently. Stork and Hollister, the intersection there, is our most congested area. It's more congested than anywhere else in the area. And with with UCSB talking about adding their massive tower and additional students, it'll only potentially get worse. And so adding a huge chunk of development without regard to the impacts on the area seems questionable.
Stuart, can we start
I'll finish.
wrapping up
I'm
our
almost
statement?
done.
Yeah, we have quite a few people waiting to speak,
I
so
just have
appreciate it.
one last point. Just with LAFCO, its purpose is to control against sprawl. And that's what this process is doing that you have now. From our perspective, from Goleta's perspective, this is sprawl. And I would ask you to ask yourself, you've not pursued any infill, which is the goals that we're supposed to have. And I would ask you, how would LAFCO have evaluated your proposal? How would they have treated what you've presented? Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so next we're going to go to Fermina, and then we're going to go to the folks who are in the room here. And I'm going to start maybe a timer so that maybe we can keep our comments to maybe a couple minutes or less. So please try to summarize your comments, and we encourage you to write them down either in the chat or on the sheets of paper. So go ahead, Fermina.
Thank you very much. I will keep it short, and I will also send my full comments in. I really agree with all the statements that have been made about protecting agricultural lands and the LAFCO and the county itself. I could not put my hands on it, but there is a publication by the county showing all of the agricultural lands near the urban areas that are precious, are so fertile, like all the lands south of the Hollister, where you pointed in the Georgie property. The San Marcos property, as a historian, we fought for that rezoning of that land in Eastern Goleta, and the community of Eastern Goleta fought for that San Marcos growers' land to be remaining agriculture and business of landscaping business. And they won. The community came and said, we want green space. We want agriculture in Eastern Goleta. It's very important. And with the climate change and food resources, our agriculture, whatever lands there are refuge for our community. If there's a disaster, we have place for agriculture. We have open space. And I think we need to really work creatively, collaboration with all the cities where we can find areas and combine the arenas so it's not independent. Like, for example, the Sears store, that is all these vacant properties that could be reused. They're near the freeway. And the Glen Eny, I want to say there's a certain prejudice about Glen Eny. Why couldn't some of this development go to the Montecito Country Club? Montecito Country Club is right near the freeway. It has no impact on anything.
Fermina, that was about 2 minutes, so can you maybe wrap up your comment, and please type in your comment in the chat.
Glen Eny is right near the agricultural land. 40 units to an acre for that area is insane and is really bad impact, not only for Goleta, but for the entire county. And I would like to also see the transparency of how these maps were done. Someone said Montecito and Hope Ranch don't have anything. We want to know that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to questions or comments here in the room from people who haven't spoken yet, just so that we're respectful and we give folks space. So from people who haven't had a chance to speak yet, so let's go, ma'am there, here, and then sir back here. I know a lot of people have comments and questions, so we just want to get to everybody.
Thank you for all your hard work. It's not an enviable task you have. I mainly have questions. I'm wondering how successful the county was in the last 8-year plan in actually coming to fruition, how much building was completed. Regarding the survey results, you may want to check in with Coastal Housing Partnership. As I was looking at your results online, I was flashing back to, they did multi-year surveys, workforce housing surveys. The same results you have there from the 500 whatever is pretty much comparable to, I remember, from the year 2000. Can you make tonight's slides available online? Would you consider breaking up the interactive maps by district or area? I'm pretty techie, not as good as a lot, but sometimes trying to do that on my iPad, it all of a sudden like, boom, goes away when I'm trying to look at particular parcels. And maybe you could narratively list the parcels by area, just so that when people are going to look at the map, oh, that one, that one. Also, I just want to comment on Zoya and Maria's comments. Thank you for taking the time. Well said, well said. And finally, with regard to Stuart's comments on traffic, holy cow. I'm just looking close to where I live here in eastern Goleta Valley, and Calle Real, as well as Hollister, are already a mess, just like you have up at Stork and Glen Annie. I'm trying to keep a Chick-fil-A from going in because we already have the drive-through trifecta at Hollister, at Calle Real and Turnpike. Lisa knows my letters. And with the planned MTD build-out, San Vicente, San Marcos Growers, those are all impacting right there in that area. And I don't think we can't rebuild either of those streets. Hollister and Calle Real are already majorly impacted with traffic. And I am concerned when we have emergencies. Thanks for listening, and have a great evening, everybody.
Hi, Jeff Nelson. I've been the developer or representative of developers for most of the infill projects in unincorporated eastern Goleta, navigating the difficult challenges of both the county and Goleta Water District. And for a long time, even in the last cycle of the housing elements, these projects were very difficult, even though they were theoretically approved or anticipated under the housing element. The county needs excessive density here, and density at 4 different standards of affordability that it's not sustainable. You're not going to have a project of 20 or 40 units an acre where truly 20% of them are very low income, 20% are low income, 20% are moderate, and then only 20 or 18% are market. The soaring cost of construction will not permit that. So the hierarchy of housing needs is inconsistent with what can actually be produced. Many of these properties that are undeveloped are legacy properties for families that are important what happens to them. And it's not just all density, we want to be very proud of what is produced ultimately. That's placemaking, that's great design, it's creating neighborhoods as opposed to just creating density. The county needs high density. Landowners may want legacy properties they're proud of. So anyway, these are not going to crop up instantly. People who are concerned about housing are going to say, this is going to happen instantly. It's hard. There's water issues. There are lots of issues. But anyway, I think there can be good projects on these infill properties, but it's probably a middle ground where there's real placemaking involved. Thank you.
Yes, so I think I saw a few more hands up here. So yes, you were next. And then we'll go to gentleman in the back and then Paula.
Good evening. I'd like to thank everybody. My name is Randy Baldwin, and I'm president of San Marcos Growers, and I'm the general manager of the nursery. And as Fermina said, it was a historical site. It was the site where the John Troop family first started farming in 1890. They did make an effort really to preserve it at one point. But I'm not speaking for the property owners themselves, the Hodges family, who very great people. They're my business partners also. But I'm here representing really the nursery and the employees. I have 52 employees that I have to look out for the long run for. And they're professional accounting staff, sales staff. Many people don't know about San Marcos Growers because we're a wholesale grower. We sell to every one of the independent nurseries in Santa Barbara. We also supply plants to the county, to the city, to UCSB. and to all the landscape professionals in town. And then we also ship throughout California also to retail nurseries and professional landscapers. And also maintain a website that's pretty well regarded throughout the nation for the accuracy and plant information we have. So my pitch is to really be careful with some of these agricultural conversions, because once you make the choice of actually doing this, there's no going back for it, and it would be the demise of our nursery. We're not the kind of thing that you could actually move off and find another site here. We have infrastructure, we have greenhouses, we have shade house buildings, and our sales staff buildings. And also, I caution you too, because the Tatum property with its density of 300 new homes going in there, that it's a proposal. It kind of wasn't on that map, I noticed, but it's on your interactive map. That's going to provide it's going to be a quality of life issue for the eastern Goleta Valley that, as people have already talked about, the traffic issues, which I just, so I know it's a real hard job you guys have, and housing is obviously needed. So that's all I'll have to say. Thank you.
So we'll take a gentleman in Mac, and then Paul, if you can step up too and just kind of cue yourselves up here. Thank you.
Thank you for calling me a gentleman. Appreciate it. My name is Wade Nomura, Mayor of the City of Carpinteria. I have a few comments and maybe a few suggestions that maybe we could work together with and see if this works out. First of all, Carpinteria, along with the rest of California, came into the RENA numbers, and we realized the impacts of that one. Carpinteria itself has numbers of 900 that we have to come up with for those numbers. And looking at the 11 sites that have been identified in Carpinteria Valley, 10 of them actually are adjacent to the city. And I understand that of course, it does fit within the urban blend. However, also looking at that, it increases the ability you have to use and tap into the resources that have been paid for by the cities. So I don't know if that's a benefit or not, but it seems to me that there should be some sort of sharing process in that one. If you look at, also, you brought up the point that you will, as a county, will not be developing. Most of this will be done by developers outside, private developers. You have to consider the fact that if they're going to be taking on these projects, there's also going to be the commercial incentives, that is the profit making and profit sharing for doing these projects. Otherwise, it just wouldn't happen. So I'd like you to maybe take a look at that as far as putting guidelines forward on how the development of each of these properties could be developed where it's, I would say, more consistent with what's happening within the cities itself. You also have to look at those numbers. If we are looking at 11 to 10 potential sites, and again, I understand that they're potential, however, most of the time we've seen these sites, they have been adopted in. We are looking at between 745 units up to 3,044 units. So looking at that and adding in the 900, we literally now have doubled the size of Carpinteria on just a small footprint. Impacts, we're looking at water, electricity, sewer, roads, education, and all of our consumables. All of a sudden now we have to double that up. That's going to be a pretty rough road for us. And if we talk about these as potentials, something that really is in fact now, we have to look at the Baylor project and how that has been developed with really out any input from the city itself. I guess that's me, right? Okay. Lastly, what I would like to recommend is taking a look at, first take a look at the city, what the municipal codes are, and make those, if they're going to be adjacent to us and we're going to eventually adopt them in, see if we can conform to that one. Consider the impacts, consider coastal zones and why we have agricultural projects or properties currently put in place, and if we get rid of those, what those impacts will be. Also take a look at responsible growth. Right now, with pretty much all of them being identified in the Carpinteria area, it seems a little off balance for the county itself. Lastly, my recommendation, my suggestion is, please let's work together. There are things and points that the county has that we as a city would like to have input on. Thank you.
I just want to say one thing, that it's important to remember that the parcels that are identified in the valley are not all going to be considered for rezoning. They were looked at, but there are only 2 that are actually identified to be incorporated into what will be presented to the Board of Supervisors at this point. So I just want to remind everybody of that because it looks scarier than I think it is. anybody can submit comments, so we're happy to receive them.
Great. So next, Paula.
Thank you. Well, thank you. My name is Paula Prodi. I'm the mayor for the city of Goleta. And I do really appreciate this opportunity to speak this evening at this workshop. This came only to our attention 1 week ago, and so it took us all by surprise, to be honest with you. We understand, as Councilmember Richards spoke, we understand the state's requirements and to build more housing and the challenges that come along with that. But here's the main thought, and I'd like to convey. We should encourage regional cooperation to meet Goleta's housing needs and affordability, but preserve and protect our community to live within our resources and fiscal responsibilities. And I have many more questions, but in the essence of time, I think, I'm only going to touch on a few, but, the idea of all of us working together, regional cooperation has always worked to our benefit in the past. So I'm curious about the workshops. How many more will you be having? I know Goleta has turned in their housing element. We started about a year ago, and we had many workshops, and it gives the opportunity for the public to weigh in, and I think it's really important. So I'm curious to how many more opportunities the public will have to speak to this. It sounds like you have considered alternative of rezoning commercial areas. That's good. Sounds like you've already done that. Thank you for that. So how can we work together to make all the regions on South Coast share the responsibility? How can we work with our state representatives, our state assembly member and senator, to the requirements are aligned with our needs and resources? And most of all, thank you for starting this discussion. And we look forward to continuing in a productive manner. Thank you.
So there's a few more comments here, and then we have folks over Zoom. So I'll take one over Zoom, and if you can cue yourself up here. So let's go to Catherine over Zoom, and then maybe those who are here in person, if you can cue yourselves up here. So Catherine, go ahead. Let's go to Eddie next.
Hi there. My name's Eddie. I grew up in Carpinteria. I want to thank county staff for navigating this sort of intense and challenging process that many municipalities in California have had to deal with, and your, of course, long and difficult march to producing a compliant housing element in the coming months. I'm glad the county has identified a number of open space options to meet its RHNA targets. I think based on the sites provided, it risks being a little too top-heavy, and that likely needs more, taking a yes and approach to what it's already presented. As some previous commenter has already indicated, this county is focused on largely vacant land. It should look at more upzoning in residential infill, especially along commercial corridors and in the high income places like Montecito and Hope Ranch. I know you all have addressed the guidance that HCD gives that restricts the options that you all have with this, but we see plenty of high income, largely single family zoned areas ignoring these options, and HCD telling them, actually, these are things you should be exploring. Most housing elements do use a good number of occupied sites, and I hope the county sees what it can do to affirmatively further fair housing by looking at places like Montecito and Hope Ranch, these greenfield sites that is already proposed. I'll be brief because I know we have many other commenters. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So let's go to our next speaker here in person.
Hi, my name is Jason Chapman. I'm a resident of Goleta. I wanted to very quickly just kind of remind everybody what the purpose of this law is, in that if every city refused to build any housing, then the whole state, would not have housing, and here we are. I mean, that's exactly what's happened. So the message is clear that we all have a responsibility to contribute to the housing needs of the state. Considering that, I want to say that I really do think that you should reconsider the commercial sites and upzoning the commercial sites. I know that there's a lot of restrictions, but when it comes to creating more housing with the least environmental impact, building where we built up already is has such great potential. We're often over allocated in parking in these areas, and that we could potentially build more housing without even tearing anything down. Building where services are and immediately adjacent makes it so that people are able to walk and bike and things like that. You know, if more housing doesn't always necessarily mean more traffic. It really depends on how you build it and if you make it as part of an integrated walkable area. So I think you should really reconsider that. I do agree with most people here that the agricultural sites, and I would almost say especially the ones within the urban areas, are really precious. And I think that we should instead consider building up where we've already built up, including, and I don't know if I have time to answer any questions, but is there any consideration of a broader sort of upzoning by just allowing a little bit more housing density and allowing that missing middle housing, townhouses, duplexes, things like that, in all residential? That's a way that you could really even out the impact without kind of picking on one city versus the other, and a way that you could gradually increase density. And you know, if we want to preserve our green spaces, we do have to be willing to have a few more neighbors, because we have to have housing. So, and I think that's how we should go about it. Thank you.
So next we have Nick over Zoom.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. My name is Nick Bobroff. I'm here on behalf of the City of Carpinteria, and I just wanted to build a little bit upon some of the comments from Mayor Nomura and some of the recent comments we've heard from a couple folks that just spoke before me. You know, I think here in Carpinteria, a lot of the community is really concerned about the emphasis on rezoning agricultural properties around the periphery of the city. All of the sites identified are outside of the urban growth boundary. They're outside of the city's sphere of influence. They're in the coastal zone. Rezoning any of these properties is inconsistent with the Coastal Act, inconsistent with the county's local coastal plan and the city's local coastal plan. And it really goes against the Coastal Commission's emphasis on protecting agricultural resources in the coastal zone. And it seems like it's also not the most environmentally responsible method of achieving the county's housing goals. Greenfield development you know, is just rife with potential problems that you might not face if you're looking more strategically at infill opportunities in existing urban areas. And again, like the couple of last speakers, I'd really encourage the county to emphasize instead looking more intensely at infill opportunities in the residential and commercial zone properties within South County, and using ag zone or rezoning of ag properties as an absolute last resort. Thank you.
Great. So we have 4 more speakers here in person. So why don't you step up, Jim, and then we'll go to Zoom.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm Jim Venturino, and thank you all for your hard work. I just had no idea what this was even going on, and now I understand just how difficult this job is going to be for you all. So thank you. So far, so good. So I'm here to put in a plug for Glen Annie, and not just as a golf course. I am a golfer. I love it there. I play golf with 13-year-olds up to 102-year-olds. I play with men, women. I play with all socioeconomic, all races, creeds. I mean, it's not just an old white guy sport. So just want to make sure that's taken into consideration. It's very social, too, for us seniors, which is, we all know how important that is for our ongoing health. But it's also an environmental gem. I mean, if you haven't been there, whether you're a golfer or not, please go. See the birds, see the geese, see the hawks eating the squirrels and the snakes, and it's just it's fabulous, and the views. So just keep that in mind when you are making your decisions. All right, thank you very much.
Next, we're going to go to JJ over Zoom.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I just wanted to voice my agreement with some of the speakers that have expressed their concern that many of these sites that are identified are not actually infill sites. They're agricultural sites that contain prime farmland that's irreplaceable. And I just think that's the wrong strategy. I think we should be looking at blighted areas, areas that need fixing up, like when we used to have redevelopment agencies, and concentrate on those areas, because then it's a win-win. We get more housing units and we also get to fix up areas that need fixing up. So I really think we need to re-strategize here. Thank you.
Thank you. So next we have Jefferson.
Thank you. My name is Jefferson Litton. I'm the Chief of Staff for County Supervisor Joan Hartman, who would have been here, but she's at a conference. First off, I want to thank staff for all their work getting us here. I know that this was just an incredible lift and an incredible burden. I also wanted to share some perspective about what we hear from constituents when we meet with them. Whether we're meeting with teachers, business owners, students, ag employees, nurses, candidates for county positions, the number one concern that we hear is housing and the lack of affordability. We need to build more housing here. We need affordable options so that our kids don't have to move away to live here, and so that our workplace can live here. All that said, this is a frustrating process. I think it's a frustrating process for you as staff. It's a frustrating process for the cities. Anytime you get an unfunded mandate from the state that doesn't take into account local constraints, it's going to be problematic. And it's going to be a challenge. And so we're trying to strike the balance here. And we talked a little bit about, sharing the responsibility regionally. I'd like to point also to our neighbors at UCSB who have failed to make 5,000 units of housing for students and 1,800 units for faculty and staff. And both the county and the city of Goleta has sued the university over that. But that goes a big way to exacerbate the crisis that we have right now. Looking forward, as we do try to endeavor to strike that balance, a couple things we've already heard from constituents is taking into account the availability of water supply, looking at regions that are available for groundwater recharge, and exploring all options for converting underutilized commercial properties before ag properties. I know that you guys have looked at that, so this is more of like an invitation to landowners. And then we also need to do everything that we can as a county to ensure that the units that get built through this process go actually to workers and are affordable and don't end up as second homes or vacation homes. And then lastly, I think this could address in the EIR, but is taking into account the traffic impacts on major thoroughfares such as Hollister, Cathedral Oaks, Patterson, Glen Annie, Stork, and Villa Real. So thank you all for the work.
So next we're going to Christy over Zoom, and then we'll go to Nathan here on site. Christy, go ahead.
Sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting myself. I just want to tag along a little bit with Mayor Nomura's comments. I think that Carpinteria has an unfair burden in this process. And it's interesting that the county will sort of gain the RENA numbers and the development fees, but it's the city of Carpinteria that will have to bear the burden of the services. And that just seems wrong to me. So I appreciate your time. I know this is a difficult process, but I do feel the Carpinterians are really shouldering the lion's share of this, and in an inappropriate way when some of the other communities are not even stepping up to be a part of this. So thank you.
Thank you. Next we go to Nathan here.
Hi, sorry to be speaking so many times tonight. But I would just like to reiterate and follow up on having a proportional development plan. You should do just a mathematical calculation by population, by city, including UCSB as its own city, and run the numbers and go, that's the numbers we're going to make work. And then the way to make it work is infill upzoning. If anybody who owns some rundown strip mall and he goes, gee, I can build 40 or 50 units on it, he will do it in a heartbeat. Those bulldozers will be out there the next day. So I think that infill, even though it takes more legwork to go hunt them all down and everything probably, could end up being a very good solution that really could, in the long run, protect everyone's interests. Because you have public transportation in place, you have all water and sewer in place, you have all the services in place. So I would just like to reiterate that and put it up there. Because you had mentioned that you looked for empty land first. I would go the exact opposite. Look for highest and best use is the phrase in real estate. You should use that as your mantra. You want highest and best use of every piece of property within an urban area. And then when you're all done with all that, then you start looking to expand out. Thank you.
Just as we're moving to the next speaker, I just want to acknowledge that infill development is ideal. And we all support infill development. And in fact, work with landowners all the time to try and encourage them to do it, make changes to our codes to encourage it and make it more viable. But we are also constrained by the state's parameters that they set for us when we're identifying how we're going to satisfy the needs. So simply because we have identified other sites for future development does not mean we will stop pursuing helping people develop on commercial properties and doing mixed-use projects. Those are important. They're resources. They can have commercial uses. They can bring people to where there are services. And so we're very, very supportive of that in general in our department. So I just wanted to make sure people understood that. It's not one or the other in this situation. We have to advocate for both. But thank you.
Okay, great. We have our last speaker here in our hearing room. So, yes. Cody?
Hi, good evening. My name is Cody Sargent. I'm an attorney with Brownstein Hyatt, just commenting on behalf of several clients impacted by particularly the rezones. Just kind of piggybacking on the theme that I'm picking up, which is obviously housing's necessary, but just wanted to flag some of the various issues with particularly rezoning these ag sites. First, many of these properties have little or no public transit available. Sprawl in these areas increases traffic, impacts air quality, increases GHG emissions, runs directly counter to the state's policy of focusing density in infill areas. Second, these rural areas impact the needed agriculture and agricultural support facilities. Some also provide much needed rec facilities. Glen Annie's a popular facility. It shouldn't be displaced at a time when these public facilities are at a premium. Third, many rural areas have narrow or no sidewalks, so introducing large numbers of new residents will require major infrastructure to make them safe for added traffic. And finally, some of these areas are located at or in ESHA, environmentally sensitive habitat areas, and thus I think there's more meticulous study that needs to go in place before inviting large numbers of new residents into these sensitive areas. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think that concludes our Q&A and discussion portion of our meeting. I want to encourage those who are on over Zoom to copy the links that have been placed in the chat for receiving updates, looking at the project website to get updates as well to see the latest and greatest. For those of you here in the room, if you did not sign in at the front table, please do so. There's on the sign-in sheet that will get you on the e-blast for getting updates for this very important effort. We want to thank you for your patience this evening. We got to make sure we got to listen to everybody. Our next steps is to capture everything that we gathered over tonight's meeting and last night's meeting, and so please check for updates on the website. As has been stated by staff, this is the first touch point with the community. Please stay involved. We encourage you to provide comments via the email that has been provided to you. That's available on the link as well. and you will receive updates through that e-blast. So with that, we want to thank you for attending both in person and over Zoom. Thank you for participating, and have a good evening.